Good day, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Before we begin, I would like to introduce our duo, which is composed of yours truly, Juliana Enriquez, and my partner, Rose Vicencio, who you will be meeting later. We hope that all of you are adjusting and coping well with this new phase of our lives, and let's keep on fighting. Moving on, I would like to introduce the topic for our presentation, and those are modules 5 to 7 under Unit 1 Analysis of Concepts. Without further ado, let me start our report. Wait. Before we start talking about the new information we would be flashing to your screen, let's do a quick recap of the previous modules. If you would still remember, the words terms, intention, extension, ambiguous, vague, and cardinal rule. Those terms were first introduced by the previous reporters, and I would like to give a heads up that we would be encountering them again throughout our discussion. Now, I will be providing a quick glimpse of what
Rose and I
would be talking about for the next 20 to 30 minutes. For Module 5, I would be talking about how you could identify ambiguous and vague terms and the fallacy of equivocation. For Module 6,
Rose and I
will be talking about the different types of definitions. And for the last module, Rose will be discussing what is the analytic definition and what are the rules you have to keep in mind when creating a definition. According to our book, there are two wrong ways to use a term, either using it ambiguously or vaguely. First, I would be discussing how we can identify ambiguous terms. We all know that a term has a variety of uses and different language games, which was mentioned by the previous reporters. However, what happens when a term acquires too many meanings and it becomes difficult to identify which among its variety of uses the speakers or writers are pertaining to? And that is when a term becomes ambiguous. We also have to take note that ambiguity is a matter of degree. This explains why a term has become too ambiguous when it acquires too many uses that it makes it difficult to identify its language game. An example given in our book is the term good, which is referred to as the central concept in moral philosophy and has a list of contradicting uses. From the point of view of hedonists, good means bodily pleasure. For humanists, it means the development of your human potential. For a utilitarian, any action that promotes the greatest happiness to the most number of people is considered good. And for a logical positivist, expressing an action of approval is considered good. And lastly, for Kantians, doing something in accordance with duty is good. So, what can we pick up from this example? With the various meanings of the term good attached to various philosophical ideologies, it may create confusion when using it for conversations or written text. Now that I have discussed what are ambiguous terms, let's move on to vague terms. We consider a term vague when its intention, referred to as the trait or sets of traits shared by the extension of a term, is too loose or unclear that makes it difficult to determine what to include and what to exclude. So an example of a vague term is the word pornography. For many of us, it is difficult to determine if a picture of a nude model can be classified as an example of obscenity or a piece of art. Furthermore, do you know how many or how little people or objects are considered when we use the determiners some, few, and many? You know that you commit a fallacy when you end up using a term in one way and later use it again in another way in the same line of reasoning? Yes, and we call it the fallacy of equivocation. And if both speakers are unaware of the shifts in the terms of use, the result is linguistic confusion. So what can we do to solve these problems? We can solve them by applying the cardinal rule. Never take part in any verbal dispute unless the disputants are using the same word in the same way. So for this one, we have two examples. So for the first one, it is a quote from John Paul Sartre. Consciousness is a being such that in its being is in question insofar as the being implies a being other than itself. So we can note from here that in this one sentence alone, the word being is used in different language games and it has caused us quite a confusion. So for the second one, why are we concerned about this nothing? The nothing is rejected by science and sacrificed as the unreal. Science wants to have nothing to do with the nothing. And what is the nothing? Does the nothing exist only because the not negation exists? Or do negation and the not exist because the nothing exists? We maintain the nothing is more than primitive than the not and negation. We know the nothing. The nothing is the simple negation of the totality of being. Anxiety reveals the nothing itself nots. So this is a quotation from Martin Heidegger. For sure, you are like me who needs to read the quotation multiple times in order to figure out what definition of nothing is being used by Heidegger in every sentence. So let's take note again that this caused us confusion. Now from the terms, let us jump towards our next module wherein we will be discussing the meaning of the term definition and the different kinds of definition. So I have a question for you again. How do you define the term definition? So a definition is a linguistic device that provides an explanation or demonstration about the use of a term. The use of a term is highlighted in terms of its intention and extension in the context of a language game. All definitions must share this common feature. A definition is complete if you are provided with a clear statement of the intention and some typical members of its extension. So for this module,
Rose and I
will be talking about 5 ways on how we can provide definitions for a term. I will be discussing 2 types of definitions, which are definition by synonym and ostensive definition, while Rose will discuss reportive definition, stipulative definition, and operational definition. So from the name itself, we use definition by synonym when someone asks us about an unfamiliar term and we reply to them by saying the synonym of the unfamiliar term. We have to note that this type of definition is the most rudimentary way of defining a term and that it can even be considered as an error called circular definition. So for better clarity, we have provided everyone 2 examples, which can also be seen in our handout. The first example is when we use the term quack to tell a person what is the definition of a charlatan. The same goes when someone asks you what is the meaning of ethics. We reply to them by saying the term morals. So at this point, you may have an idea that the definition by synonym is not the best way to define a term. And if your answer is that not all terms have synonyms, and then you are correct. An example of such terms are the words mammals and birds. We don't have any synonyms for such terms, and we must take note that even if words have synonyms, there are still differences in their meanings or definitions, like in terms of degree. If in the last slides we define terms using their synonyms, in this case we define terms through giving examples of the members of its extension. According to the book, this method is considered the most common way of conveying the use of a term. Again, we will be providing a few examples. In this case, we have the terms that I have mentioned earlier, which are mammals and birds. When someone asks you, what is a mammal? You reply to them by saying elephants and dolphins since they are part of the term's extension. It is also the same way when someone asks you to define the term bird. You reply to them by giving examples like chickens and pigeons. And for my last slide, I will be stating the limitations of using the ostensive definition. Firstly, it is considered as incomplete because we are only providing extensions, so we may end up disregarding other extensions of the term that were not mentioned or listed. For example, with the term bird, by saying chickens and pigeons only, the person you are communicating with might misunderstand that chickens and pigeons are the only animals that can be considered as a bird and disregard the rest. And like the previous definition, not all terms, especially those that are classified under analytic, fictitious, metaphysical, dispositional, and theoretical concepts, have extensions that we can easily identify. Examples are the terms atoms and magnetic. And as I have said, this is incomplete because we are only providing the terms extension, because we need the terms complete intension and extension to consider it a proper definition. And that is all from me. I will be passing the floor to my partner Rose to discuss the remaining topics of our presentation.
Hi, I'm Rose Vicencio, and I'll be taking over the presentation from here. As it has been previously discussed by Juliana, Module 6 tackles all about the various types of definition. And one of those definition is reportive definition. You see, in times when someone asks us about a certain meaning of a term, and when we provide them simply the information as to how the term is being used in the same way in numerous language games, we basically give them a reportive definition. These kinds of report is basically classified as the standard use or the conventional use. A conventional use is simply put is the term used by actual people in numerous real life situations. Basically, in a more simple explanation, reportive definition is often utilized and can be identified similar to dictionary definitions. It is basically synonymous with the lexical definition in the literature of logic. So, to further explain, we can say as an example the term bachelor. Bachelor can be defined using the reportive definition or the dictionary or through dictionary by saying that it refers to an unmarried man. Likewise, the meaning of prime numbers is just as any integer divisible only by 1 and itself. And so, reportive definition also comes with its limitation. Similar to any dictionary, reportive definition are commonly somewhat incomplete. Many terms are usually just defined only ostensibly or by synonyms. It is mainly focusing on the intention itself without providing any sufficient examples of the members of the extension. And so, moving forward with the next definition, which is stipulative. This time, this definition suggests using a term in a very unique way in the language game. And unlike reportive definition, stipulative does not use any term conventionally. So, for many specialized purposes like such as conducting scientific research, enacting legislation, and coining a term in philosophy, and the likes are, according to Wittgenstein, can be circumscribe the use of the term. By this, we can say, we can simply put that we can specify a precise definition or the use of the term in a specific purposes that we may use it. As such, Stipulative definition is often utilized in introducing a technical term. So to visualize what I'm saying, we can think that there are many various technical terms in philosophy which are introduced in this type of definition. For instance, terms such as simple object, ideas, sense data, a priori, the absolute, corporeal, and the likes. These said terms are metaphysical terms that can only be understood if and only if one investigates its context by playing the language game played by the specific philosopher. Um, and as per the limitation, of course, when we use a specific term in a specialized way, we depart from the conventional ways of defining it. Hence, it is significant um, that we must also inform our audience or our reader if we are to utilize this definition in order to avoid misinterpretation or misunderstanding. So, and finally, we move on to the last and final definition, which is operational definition. It is said that operational definition is the technique to introduce dispositional concepts. Dispositional concepts are those concepts that do not exhibit directly observable characteristics of their intention, and that certain operations, observation, or examinations must first be performed. In a way, these anchors theoretical as well as dispositional terms on the plane of observation. Basically, this type of definition was actually invented by Percy W. Bridgman, an American physicist that believed that operational definition has two types of operations, namely instrumental operations, which is performed through devices and measurements like telescope and microscope. On the other hand, paper and pencil operations are performed through verbal and thought experiments. So, such an example of this is the word or the term soluble. In instrumental operation, we can define soluble or by performing an operation, which is if you put sugar in water and you observe it to dissolve. On the other hand, in paper and pencil operation, the term intelligent quotient or IQ can only be tested through the commonly known by taking the test like Binet IQ test. And so for the limitation, and so in operational definition, we can say that the operation that must be performed to define a term or a concept is the intention, while it is a necessary and a sufficient condition for membership that refers to the extension. The intention here is a very strict intention. If after performing the operation and it does not meet the expected observation, then we can say that it is not a member of the extension of the concept or the term. Basically, we can say that the limitation in this is the fact that you must perform an operation in order to confirm the definition of the term. And so, um, let us now move forward to our next module, which is all about analytic definition. Here, it focuses only on one type of definition. So what exactly is analytic definition? Um, this type of definition is centered or focused on the statement of the intention without vagueness, and the offering of typical examples of the extension. And unlike any traditional version of the logical definition, which has only two categories, analytic definition consists of three, namely, oh, I'm sorry, has three categories, namely the definiendum, definiens, and the denotata. So, if you're wondering what is the difference between the three, here is a table to visualize their difference. Definiendum basically is the term that needs to be defined, while the definiens, on the other hand, provides the intention or the defining property of the definiendum. We must keep in mind that the definiens consist of two parts, which is the genus and the differentia. We can define the genus in which it is by saying that the wider concept, the definiendum, is a member. Um, Remember that the wider concepts is called the genus, while the member concept is called species. Later on, I will give an example to understand this further. The other part of the definitions is the differentia. The differentia's main job is basically to distinguish the definiendum from all the other types of species. This is where the set of traits, or the characteristic must be specifically defined. And finally, the denotata is what gives the typical examples of the members included in the extension of the definiendum. Usually, it is the denotata that is most neglected aspect of almost all types of definition found in the literature of logic and somewhat in philosophy of language, because basically it is usual for us to define a term without giving proper examples of the extension. And so here is an example. To further explain the difference of these three categories, here's a table to understand it further. So in this table, we can see the concept of mammals. The very distinction between every mammal is their mammary glands. In this case, these species can be subdivided into three main genuses. Um, there are three genuses, which are monotremous, marsupials, and placentals. With these genuses, the differential between the three are that monotremous are egg-laying mammals, while marsupials are mammals that carry their young in abdominal pouches, and placentals, on the other hand, those that nourishes their embryos through internal placenta in the womb. And finally, the denotata of each genuses of the mammals are in monotremous, the platypus, spiny amphitheater, and such, while in marsupials, kangaroo, koala, possum, and others. Placentas, on the other hand, are man, dog, cats, monkeys, and the like. And so, now that we have fully understood the difference between categories of the analytic definition, um, we must also keep in mind that the complexity of this concept is somehow also inevitable for us to encounter some errors in composing a definition. And so this table that I will be explaining further will give us a better understanding and to be a better critical thinkers to avoid committing these common errors. So in here, we have the here this table that depicts the concept of bird. In this example, we have a bird that serves as the definiendum and the different definiens and the denotata. Our genesis is as an animal, and our differentia are that those bird that flies, that lays egg, that sings and talks. So where does the error here lies? The differential that flies is too broad, that it will basically involve non-members of the concept, given that bats, butterflies, and even moths can be included. Likewise, the differential that lays eggs is also too broad, that it can include animals like platypus, turtles, and crocodiles. Both the differential that flies and lays egg um, does not discriminate fully between the birds from the rest of the animal kingdom. And contrarily, the differentia that sings or talks is too narrow, that it can exclude animals that cannot sing nor talk but are genuinely members of the extension because they have feathers. With this, we can see that basically the typical errors that we are predisposed to make in analytical definition. Um, you can also observe that the differentia and the intention are very critical when it comes to analytic definition. This is why we also must be very careful in constructing a definition, because it can either be too broad or too narrow statements of the definitions. And so, after the discussion of these common errors, here is the final segment of Module 7, which will give us a sufficient information as to how we should correctly compose a good analytic definition in order for us to also avoid the said common errors discussed previously. So here is five rules in composing a definition. Number 1, a sound definition should state a trait, characteristic, or set of traits are per se, or function that members must possess. Remember, it should not be too broad to include non-members or too narrow to exclude genuine members. And secondly, definitions must not be circular. We should avoid using synonyms such as belief is having faith, and faith is having belief. For the third one, a definition must not be stated in the negative when it can be stated in the affirmative. It should state what it is and not what it is not. And second to the last is that definition should not use figurative language, obscure, and metaphorical language. For instance, love is never having to say you're sorry, or that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. With this, it may be poetic, but it is uninformative. And finally, avoid defining by synonyms as said previously or by ostensive definitions. These are incomplete as well as misleading techniques. And that concludes our presentation. Again, I'm Rose Vicencio, together with my partner Juliana Enriquez, and the things we have discussed are modules 5 to 7 of philosophical analysis, under Unit 1, the analysis of concepts. We hope that you have learned something from our presentation. Thank you very much for your time and for listening.